All right, welcome back to Niners Nightly. Larry Krueger with you on the Sports Leader. And if you know me, that I love talking Niners with my man JD, John Dickinson. We call him Boots on the Ground because JD's everywhere covering everything. And he's been doing an incredible job covering the Warriors, who don't ever seem to ever want to lose with Jimmy Butler. It's amazing. But we're going to talk a little Niners this segment with JD. JD, thanks for jumping on. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah, good to be with you as always, Larry.
Well, this big story of the day, JD, Mike Silver alluded to an organizational shift within the 49ers. And he mentioned that, Shanahan's not on the hot seat. It's not like he's saying Shanahan's on the hot seat, but they went 6-11. And it sounds like Jed wants kind of a belt tightening. It's basically, it sounds like the Niners feel like they need to be more ruthless in their negotiations, that they feel like the agents have taken them for a ride on the Bosa deal, on the Debo extension, on the Aiyuk deal. And it sounds to me like they like Kyle Shanahan. They don't want him to go away. They don't want to get rid of him, but they want him to just coach. It sounds like they want John to just draft. And it sounds like they're maybe handing the chief negotiator role over to Parag Marathe in the hopes that he can get more team favorable contracts. Am I reading this correctly? How did you read this?
Yeah, the big takeaway for me, and I think the interesting part is it relates to, well, what's the next big deal that the 49ers have to get done? It's the Brock Purdy deal. And I think, well, you can understand a little bit of a philosophical shift on that front because of the contracts that you mentioned, going back to Nick Bosa and even prior to that with the Debo deal and the way everything played out with Brandon Aiyuk. I think what's been reported is this regret that the 49ers maybe didn't play a little bit more hardball in a couple of those situations or in all of those situations, and had they might be in a better financial position as it relates to the salary cap and future structure of continuing to build the team moving forward. I don't think it's necessarily a cash issue or a not wanting to spend issue. I think it's more just the machinations of the salary cap and being able to continue to remain competitive. The part that I don't like about this is the fact that it almost makes Brock Purdy have to be the one who's accountable for these other admitted mistakes or admitted situations where they wish things had been different. And I think that's just it's a bad place to be. I mean, how much have we debated it really since the final month of the season, because the 49ers, it was apparent they were going to be out of it, about Brock Purdy's contract and about what it was going to cost. And would Purdy take a discount? I think there's been this false belief out there among some that, hey, Brock Purdy's a really nice guy and he's a team guy. And so he's going to take this hometown discount for the Niners. And he's basically going to save all of the decisions that have been made that maybe you regret or aren't fully on board with, 2020 hindsight. And so I think you're playing a dangerous game when you're expecting a quarterback that's never been paid to be the guy that you're now going to test this new philosophy on, because he's the guy you may need to pay more fairly than anybody. And so I don't love the timing of it. While I think I understand the mentality shift. Here's the other thing. I don't think history would tell you that anytime Jed York starts to become more involved, that's not great. Like that in terms of like the day-to-day, this is how we want to operate. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're not going to do. Like and I get it. Lynch and Shanahan are fine. They're not on the hot seat right now. That's all fine. And I believe that. And that's consistent with obviously what you've heard, what I've heard, everything. So it's not necessarily about that. It's just, we saw like what ultimately broke up the last successful 49ers regime. It was Jed York starting to get more involved, and it was Parag starting to get more involved. And not that he isn't accountable for a lot of the successes that the 49ers have had. Both of them are, but it's this notion that, go back to the end of the Jim Harbaugh era. What was it? It was Jed was more involved. Jed wasn't happy with the way things were getting done. And it was also Parag's doing this, Parag's going to do that. And so that, as talented as he is at the things that he does within the organization, it did send me back a decade to like, oh, like, is this, we're not close to it, but could this in some way be the beginning of a fracture when you're talking about a quarterback contract negotiation, and now you're talking about a couple of guys who became too much of the story? I think that's probably the best way to put it. When the Jim Harbaugh era ended and that era of 49ers success ended, Jed York and Parag Marathe became too much a part of the story to the detriment of success. And I just would fear and hope that cooler heads can prevail. Look, friction is always going to exist in high-level organizations. We see this all the time with the Warriors. Joe Lacob wants to do this, and Bob Myers wanted to do that, and Mike Dunleavy's here, and Lacob's son's an assistant GM, and you've got scouts, and you have this environment where people are encouraged to openly share their ideas, and it might get a little contentious from time to time, but everybody has to be cool and comfortable with that and understand that the betterment of the franchise is going to come from it. I think this ramps up what we've talked about a lot, which is you want the offseason to be harmonious for the Niners this offseason, and it just feels like it's off to an unharmonious start now suddenly.
There's so many interesting points you made there. One, on the Harbaugh Balky regime, I mean, it was a flawed regime from the standpoint of they were never tied together, right?
True.
And Jed, at the beginning of the Lynch and Shanahan regime, he was really hell-bent that these guys be tied together. So I think there was a little dysfunction in the culture of the Harbaugh Balky thing. But Jed injected himself into the situation and made it, exponentially worse. And what I mean by that was Jim Harbaugh pulled an end around in that negotiation. He had his agent, David Dunn. I want $25 million. The Niners finally gave in, gave him the money he wanted. The next day after the press conference, he went right back to Jed and said, I don't want Balky as the GM. I want Michael Lombardi. And Jed should have told him no and did tell him no. But Jed's mistake was he didn't sit on that. He told Balky. And that's why that relationship after that first opening press conference was all smiles. After that, those guys were trying to survive one another the rest of the time. And was it a bad structure initially? Yeah, but it was also Jed making a bad decision. He should have sat on that information, never told Trent Baalke, and instead he told Trent Baalke. So Baalke knew that Harbaugh wanted him out. So that was the fracture there. Now, this is interesting that they have a brand new structure. Kyle trusts John. John trusts Kyle. But now it's like I heard Tim Kawakami's reporting, well, if they had won a Super Bowl, if they had gone to the Super Bowl, everything would be all right, everything's right in the world. But because they went 6-11, now it's time for like a reassessment. And I get the sense that, that Kyle is being told just coach, that John's being told just draft, and that negotiations will be held, run by Parag. And we'll see. And you're right. It's like this whole belt tightening right as you're about to negotiate Brock Purdy's deal. They don't want the all in. We're running it back. We want to get all in. They don't want the emotional coach driven response of Kyle Shanahan. It sounds like they want to be cold and calculating and analytical when it comes to roster decisions. And this reset is a way of reintroducing Parag as kind of, everybody's like, well, who's your boss? I mean, NFL head coaches and general managers, in a lot of ways, they're middle managers. Like, who's the boss of the Warriors in the NBA?
Joe Lacob.
It's Joe Lacob.
Yeah.
It's not Mike Dunleavy. It's not Steve Kerr. Is Steve Kerr, Steve Kerr and Mike Dunleavy are middle managers. Well, what gets you fired as a middle manager? When you no longer look at the person above you as the person you need to make happy, and you're trying to side with the players. The middle manager has to either side with the players or side with the owners. And technically, you're supposed to side with the owners because they're your bosses. But it sounds like, maybe Jed feels that Kyle and John have sided with the players and aren't overly concerned about Jed's budget and are more concerned about getting their players paid and being popular with the players in the room. And maybe this is Jed's way of pushing back on that. What do you think?
I think there's something to that. The other thing I go back to relate it to the Harbaugh regime is, I got the sense that when the 49ers, because you brought up, well, if the Kawakami about, well, if they had won the Super Bowl or gotten there again or whatever, I got the sense going back to, this is my opinion of how it played out, that Jed York kind of never forgave Jim Harbaugh for when they didn't win the, like, to me, everything changed when they got to the Super Bowl and then they didn't win the Super Bowl. And it almost set up this, well, you've got one more year, and then they lost to Seattle that next year, and then Jim was back for the final year, and they go 8-8, and they wind up missing the playoffs. I just feel like there is almost a little similarity to, like, everything was fine because they were a rebuilding team, and then they got to a Super Bowl. And then it was COVID. So that year got wiped out when they were 6-10 and all the injuries, and rightfully so. Then they're right back in championship game where Brock gets hurt, Super Bowl. So really, this is the first time where they had reached a peak or a pinnacle, and now things had started to take a little bit of a negative turn in terms of the record. And again, it just kind of makes me think back to, the Niners get to that Super Bowl. They don't win it. They have the one more year to kind of go back at it. They come up short, and then all hell broke loose. And I'm just, again, I know it's not apples to apples completely, but there is a little bit of a similarity of, all right, now this thing is starting to steer downward a little bit. How do you get it back on track? But it's almost, all right, well, now I got to step in. Now I have to step in because we didn't get to the Super Bowl again, or we didn't get over the hump and win the Super Bowl. So that would just give me a little bit of concern or pause, here moving forward as it relates to, because I think, look, I get maybe the 49ers believe that they agreed to some bad contracts, or they under the lens of wanting to run it back because they thought they were close. They did some things that maybe practically they didn't want to do. The other part I don't like about it is there's a sense to me that people are keeping score in the organization now. And that's the part that I don't like. Like, to me, it's you do a Debo deal, and you do a Debo deal because these two people wanted it, but then these other two people maybe didn't want it. And now 3 years later, it's like, well, hey, you were right, I was wrong. So, or like that, I feel like there's a little sense of, or this, we shouldn't have hit this number with Aiyuk. You go above that number. Well, hey, guess what? I told you shouldn't have done that, and you did it, and it failed. So, like, now we have, like, it feels like there's a little bit more of that potentially going on here, which wouldn't make me feel good about things either, if that makes sense.
Well, so it's like we can't really decide if these are positive changes or negative changes for the franchise.
The philosophical changes, I get you come up short, and you're at a point now where guys have gotten paid, and you have to do this little reset. Like, I understand that. Like, I don't think that's being cheap or anything like that. Like, to me, that's sustainability. But you don't want to end up like the Giants or the Warriors before the Jimmy Butler trade, where it looked like you hung on to some guys too long, and then you were fighting with the same guys over and over. You didn't have enough new blood. You weren't good enough, and you were just allocating your money in a way that it was harder to be competitive and successful and get back to that level. Like, I understand that thought process, but to have your first test case potentially be your quarterback, when that's the guy you need to get signed, and then you know what,
your season's hanging in the balance.
You know what, if you want to decide that you're not going to give out the contracts that maybe you've given out to other really good younger players as they come of age, or you want to play more hardball with them when their time for an extension comes up, that's fine. Do that with those other players. You don't do that with your star franchise quarterback, I guess would be my point.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And according to Mike Silver, the 49ers are reportedly going to treat Brock Purdy's current negotiation with a, quote, ruthless mentality. We shall see. Now, like if you told me, Krug, isn't this exactly what you've been kind of arguing? And I'm like, yeah, this is what I've been pushing for, which is I've been saying that I like Kyle Shanahan, I like John Lynch, but I think Kyle Shanahan's a great offensive play caller, play sequencer. But I think his feel for personnel, based on what I can glean on the offensive players he's drafted for the most part, is pretty spotty. So I would take Kyle Shanahan out of the personnel equation. And I think it's interesting that a lot of people are like, why didn't he go to the combine? Maybe he didn't go to the combine because he's going to have less say on personnel than he's ever had before. And he's like, why am I there? So I have no problem that he's not at the combine, and I have no problem with taking away any kind of personnel control from him because I don't think that's his area. As far as John's concerned, maybe it is better for the team. Maybe they would get better deals if John didn't handle the contracts, and maybe Prague is more cutthroat than John. So maybe that's a positive as well. And so overall, I can't really say that I think these are negatives, but we're going to have to see not just the theory, but in practice and what it looks like. Do the Niners have a good draft? Do they get guys signed on time? Or does Prague handling the negotiations drive, this into a holdout situation or something where Brock's not there for training camp? The other question that came up this week of major note, and we tackled it a little bit yesterday with Tom Kern from NBC Boston, is Brandon Aiyuk going to be traded? Did John Lynch tell Chase Sr. at the combine when he spoke that they were going to, in as many words, that they're going to move on from Brandon Aiyuk? I mean, he was asked about Brandon Aiyuk trade rumors. He easily, like in 2 sentences, could have put the whole thing to bed. We just signed him. Of course, he's going nowhere. That's our guy. We love him. He's going to be here. End of story. Next question. Instead, he went into a long diatribe about how much cash they've spent, how they need to have a belt tightening, how the positive of this, never stating what this is that they need to get younger. So it almost was like what I heard was John Lynch telling Chase Sr., we are on the verge of trading Brandon Aiyuk away at what was going to be viewed as a loss by a lot of you, but we are going to get some draft pick compensation in the deal. And overall, it's a reset on our finances and a step towards we need to get younger. Aiyuk had 13 catches this year and for 167 yards in 4 games before he broke down. Or actually before he had an 8-catch, 147-yard performance against Arizona in week 6. And then 2 games later, he sustained the season-ending injury, torn ACL, MCL, meniscus. Is Aiyuk going to be traded? What was your read on what Lynch said there in Indy?
Well, I thought it was fascinating. The thing that I go back to is when the 49ers ultimately at the end of August, right before the season, decided to do the deal to keep Brandon Aiyuk, the day that they were going to trade him and then they wound up signing him. Did they basically internally at that point make the decision that, hey, we're going to do this. He's going to be a really good player. We're going to do this. We're going to get him here. We're all in. We're trying to get back to the Super Bowl, but we're going to trade him in a year. Like, he's going to have a really good year. He's a young, on the upswing player. He's going to have a great year. We're going to go back to the Super Bowl or an NFC Championship game, but then we're going to trade him in the offseason, and then he gets hurt. And so I that was my first thought on the whole, because to me with the injury, I don't see how you wind up getting appropriate value. And I think this is where an original plan has been wrecked in some ways by the injury, because I think it is very smart, a smart way to say, hey, all right, what's the best of all worlds? You want to keep Brandon Aiyuk as a Niner. Okay, well, you can keep him. We'll sign him. We'll get him happy. We'll get him in. And then we're going to trade him in a year after he has a great year. But he didn't have a great year and he wound up hurt. And now he's going to miss a chunk of this next year. So to me, I think the internal discussion is almost, well, no, we said we were going to try to move him. We still need to try to move him. for the financial purposes and for the ability to acquire assets in return for him. But to me, it's now like you're not going to get what you would have gotten had he gone out and had a borderline all pro or at least a minimum Pro Bowl type of a season. Like, to me, it would make a lot of sense if Aiyuk was healthy and productive to look to pivot. It really would, especially if he was somebody that was deemed maybe unhappy, right? Because I think even though the Niners kept him, he never really seemed happy. Like, he was happy to get paid, but I don't think he really I think he wanted to get paid in a perfect world and leave. And ultimately that didn't happen. So, I mean, if he was healthy, I would say, yeah, it makes sense. I just don't, to me, you almost have to have him come back and be productive and then look to move off of him. But it sounds like, I mean, to me, the reason John Lynch says what he said is, to me, it's letting the rest of the league know we're open for business on this guy. And if you think you can, get him rehabbed from the injury and there aren't concerns about that, then you can have him as long as you're willing to and that becomes a part of this 49ers reset. Like, I think they have the backup plan in their mind of move Aiyuk, get draft capital, use the draft capital here. I think they have their eye on a couple of receivers, in free agency, maybe one in free agency they think they can get, or via another trade, maybe that they think they can get. And then maybe, they're look to continue to assess that in the draft. Like, I think all of these things are obviously tied together. They like Ricky Pearsall. Like, I think all of these things are tied together. And the one thing I would say, though, that I wonder, Larry, was the plan all along to sign Aiyuk and then trade him a year later. And now the reason that doesn't look like maybe it's the best move is because of the injury.
I don't think that was the original plan, but I think that now, after the 6-win season, they want to hit the reset, and I think they're going to prioritize Jed's money over getting top value for Aiyuk, and I think they're going to move him. And this, there's a lot of talk about draft picks being swapped. The first assumption is maybe Aiyuk in the 11th pick for the 4th pick, because that's where the Patriots pick. And maybe that could be the case. Will Campbell just has measured with short arms, and they supposedly love him. But maybe he'll fall to 11, and maybe they're thinking, hey, we'll get the same guy we're going to take at 4. We'll get him at 11. We'll add Aiyuk. I mean, the Pats have $127 million of cap room, so their cap situation's is probably the most friendly or most easy for them to acquire a player like Aiyuk. But I think it also could be something quite a bit less. Like, I would not be surprised if it was like Brandon Aiyuk and a 4th-round draft choice to the Patriots for 2 third-round draft choices and Davin Godchak or something like that, where you're like, well, what's the real value here? Because what's the value of Godchak versus Aiyuk? What's the value of a 4 versus 2 3s?
That's why I'd be reluctant to do it, Larry. Like,
I think they're motivated about the money, JD. I don't think they're worried about the picks or how it looks. I think they're taking that because there is a big amount of money that the 49ers will save if they move Aiyuk. I mean, it's a significant amount of money. I was looking at some of the numbers. It's big. I mean, it's not like if the Niners were to trade Aiyuk, it would cost them $7.65 million of additional cap change this year. And the salary cap for this year would include nearly $50 million for wide receivers no longer on the team. A trade of Aiyuk would also mean that the other team would pick up his $22.85 million option bonus due April 1st. He would still count 18.4 against the Niners cap this year, but the Samuel trade means the Niners absorb $31 million in dead money. But, I just think that what they're really after is reclaiming some of those future years' money, and I think they're willing to take a paltry sum. I think Aiyuk's going to be dealt. I think he probably will be to New England, but I think it's going to be for, like, as I said, it's not going to be like, wow. It's going to be like Aiyuk and a 4th-round pick for like a 3rd and 3/7 or something like. It's going to be one of those deals where it's not going to be favorable to the Niners, but what the Niners are going to get out of it is they're going to get out of the back end finances on this contract.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way to put it is it's set up to not look great. It's set up to not be favorable in the court of public opinion, whether that's the fan base and or the media evaluation. And I think initially the short-term success, I think it has the potential to be viewed negatively. And look, I'll go back to something I've said a couple of times already, because I'm curious your thoughts on this. Like, I understand getting the financial house in order and doing things a little bit differently. I don't, though, feel when you look at the 49ers schedule in 2025 and the fact that they've still got Brock Purdy and they've still got Christian McCaffrey and like they've still got Fred Warner and they've still got Nick Bosa. Like, to me, I get maybe you can't be all in from the financial standpoint that you've been the last 2 years, but I would be really, really concerned about sending the message that you're not all in on trying to be a contender for a Super Bowl this season. And look, I think the Debo trade, and I think wrongly, because Debo's a player that had outlived his shelf life, at least with the 49ers. Maybe he goes somewhere, and I think he's got a little Jimmy Butler to him, to be honest. Like, I think he's going to go somewhere else, and maybe he puts it together for a year and has a bounce back year, but clearly is on the downturn. But like, that was viewed among the fan base as, well, wait a minute, you're not all in, you're kind of giving up. And I think that was the wrong assessment there, because Debo's on the downturn as a player. But if, like, to me, like this year is set up in a lot of ways for them to continue to try to go, like, don't be setting yourself up for 26, 27, 28 right now. Like, be trying to go as far as you can and be as good as you can be in 2025. Again, I get it if you have to financially go about it a different way, but I think the 49ers need to be careful to have the perception be that they're willing to take a step back from contending for the Super Bowl this year. Does that make sense? Like that to me that to me should be considered unacceptable, even if you are going to spend differently.
Yeah, I mean, and that means that they're going to have to do some additions. And on that front, there's a lot of people asking this week, are they interested in Joey Bosa, just recently released by the Chargers? Are they interested in trading for Trey Hendrickson? A lot of talk is the Bengals want a third-round pick. Harold Landry got released today. A lot of speculation still about Myles Garrett and that where he may go. And today, Jonathan Allen was cut by the Commanders, and Eric Branch has put this out this afternoon. The 49ers are reportedly expected to target Jonathan Allen, Commanders defensive tackle, in free agency. This is according to Eric Branch. What do you think? So, I mean, if you want to convince people that you're in it to win it, go add a couple veterans of significance that can help you win. Guys like Jonathan Allen, who are veterans, that will go a great distance to telling the fan base and the rest of the other players as well that your belt tightening is really not necessarily about not going for it. It's just about moving off of certain players and certain contracts. What do you think of the addition of Jonathan Allen in free agency? How much do you think that would help the Niner D-line?
I love it. I think he's somebody, it makes a lot of sense why the Niners would not have wanted to grab him as part of the Deebo Samuel trade, just based on the financial machinations of all of it. But now the fact that they've let him go and he's available, I think that would be a great move. I mean, I think they do need to look at interior defensive line has been the number one thing, I think, above everything else. And I think he's a hell of a player. And so I like him. I like Bosa for the outside, Joey Bosa. I think if you can get, I don't know that you're going to get a discount. Like, when did the Bosas ever take a discount? Even as a potentially declining player, or player with some red flags, I think Joey Bosa still will have a pretty high opinion of his ability to be a big time pass rusher and stay healthy and all of that. So I think he's always looking. The Bosas are always looking to maximize their earning potential. So I'm not sure you get the brotherly discount that maybe you think you would get, but I tell you what, I really feel like if you could figure out a way to get Joey Bosa, I think you'd be getting the best of both brothers. I really do. Like, I think you'd be getting a motivated duo to dominate. And, we really, you tell me what you think of it. But if you get Joey Bosa, to me, that would be the best duo the 49ers have had. Even like since
D Ford.
D Ford was the name that came to mind, but like they have not had, and you have to keep Joey Bosa healthy, obviously, to make that happen. But to me, if you do, that would be bookends that you really haven't had at anything close to it. Maybe the 8 games of D Ford in 2019 or whatever it was.
Well, it's interesting. It really is interesting. I think Joey Bosa would have to take a significant pay cut to come here. But you know what? If you could somehow get a Joey Bosa and a Jonathan Allen in free agency at more reasonable prices, after watching Armand Membu work out and seeing Will Campbell, the talk that he may drop, maybe that solidifies the Niners' whole plan. Maybe the plan is, draft a big-time offensive tackle at 11 and come back in rounds 2 or 3 for defensive linemen and fill in the short term with guys like Jonathan Allen and Joey Bosa and have more of a veteran look up front. But there's going to be some changes for sure on that front seven. I think this Niner off season, is there such a thing as a Niner off season that's drab and dull and nothing goes on? It's like it's Trey Lance, it's this, it's that. One last thought on the way out the door. We only got 30 seconds left, but it's pretty clear that if there's a theme coming out, it's that Jed York has kind of yanked everybody's sheets and just said, nobody's going to be comfortable anymore. If we're going to win 6 games, Kyle, you're not drafting. John, you're not negotiating. Parag's going to be a bigger central focus of this thing. And it may also be their approach with Brock Purdy, not just his contract, but how his standing is on the team. Who's their plan B at quarterback? Do they now, instead of going, last year, Brandon Allen, Josh Dobbs, friendly, nice guys that are definitely lesser, is this year they say, screw that. We're going to go get Zach Wilson. We're going to go get Mac Jones. We're going to go get Justin Fields, or we're going to go get Kirk Cousins or Aaron Rodgers. We're going to make, Brock Purdy uncomfortable because there's going to be somebody here that can steal his job if he doesn't play at a high level. Do you think who's your second quarterback this year? And do you think we're onto something there?
Well, I don't know that any of those guys would you'd feel good about taking his job. Number one, any of the guys that you mentioned, sure. I don't even know how many of those guys I'd feel comfortable if they were the primary backup, to where, hey, if you needed to, he was out for a couple of games, you'd need to win, that they could get you the requisite wins to kind of keep your season alive. That's a great question. I think an ultimate tell. And I think it, honestly, what they do is going to be dictated, in my mind, by how this negotiation continues to go. Like, I think it's going to be a tell. Like, if they go out immediately and spend a little bit on a legitimate backup, like a guy that could come in and, think Sam Darnold type, like somebody that maybe has not had the career that he had hoped, but still had a lot of that potential. I think that's one way to go, to where, you're putting a little bit of pressure on him. I don't know. I don't know. I guess would Zach Wilson be the equivalent of that? I mean, I guess I don't know.
Zach Wilson would make Brock uncomfortable, probably. Justin Fields, Mac Jones, those guys may make him uncomfortable. That may be the plan. JD, we got to jump, but great stuff as usual. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks again.
Thanks, Larry.
The great John Dickinson stopping by. We'll continue with more Niners Nightly next on the Sports Leader.